The Eleanor who emerged from this, if I emerged at all, would be someone else entirely. Gunfire erupted around our vehicle, the tactical team arriving just as one of Richard's men approached my door. Time compressed into frantic snapshots. Claire. Shoving me to the floor, the deafening exchange of bullets, Rodriguez's steady voice coordinating with the tactical team. When silence finally fell, Claire helped me up. It's secure. We're safe. 3 of Richard's men, including Marcus Dalton, were in custody. The 4th hadn't survived. Richard wasn't among them, Claire confirmed, studying my face. But we know where he's heading. The FBI's command center hummed with activity as we arrived. On screens around the room, I watched the unraveling of Richard's criminal empire in real time. The offshore accounts frozen. Associates arrested across 3 continents. The private airfield where his charter waited now surrounded by federal agents. He's cornered, Claire's supervisor explained. All exits blocked. My phone rang, Richard's number. Everyone in the room fell silent as Claire nodded for me to answer on speaker. Eleanor. His voice was eerily calm. I see you've made some new friends. It's over, Richard, I replied steadily. The FBI has everything. The foundation office, the warehouse, the accounts. Marcus is in custody. A long pause. Then you understand what I'm capable of. I found the contingency plan with my name on. It? I said, my voice never wavering. The terminal solution. Was that always part of the plan, Richard? To kill me if I became inconvenient? Don't be dramatic, he sighed. It was just a precaution. I would have preferred the simpler option. The divorce, your apparent infidelity, a clean break. Nothing about you is clean, I replied. 20 years, Richard? Was any of it real? Another pause. The early years, before the opportunities became too significant to ignore. You were a complication I hadn't anticipated. Where are you? I asked, though I already suspected. Somewhere you'll never find me, he said with familiar arrogance. You think you've won, Eleanor, but I always have another contingency. The FBI traced the call to our penthouse. The tactical team found it empty, but discovered Richard's laptop open to a live video feed of Victoria Montgomery's Boston home. Richard's final leverage, his own mother. What Richard hadn't known was that the FBI had already secured Victoria's cooperation months earlier. She'd suspected her son's activities and had been feeding information to investigators, hoping to save him from himself. The Boston team confirmed Victoria was safe. Richard's last play had failed. They found him 3 hours later at a small private dock, attempting to board a yacht registered to one of his shell companies. He surrendered without resistance, his customary composure finally breaking as they led him away in handcuffs. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse, watching as Richard entered his final plea. Our eyes met briefly across the courtroom. The man I'd slept beside for 20 years, now a stranger in Prison Orange. The charges were extensive: money laundering, tax evasion, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence overwhelming. His cooperation with authorities to reduce his sentence had implicated dozens of others, including corporate executives and international criminals. The judge's gavel fell. 30 years. No possibility of parole until Richard was 75. Outside, reporters clamored for comments. I declined, walking past them to where Claire, no longer undercover, her natural brown hair now framing her face, waited. "Congratulations," she said. "It's really over." Victoria Montgomery approached hesitantly from the courthouse steps. We'd spoken several times during the proceedings, finding unexpected common ground in our shared sense of betrayal. "Eleanor," she said, her Boston reserve softened by grief. "I'd like you to come to dinner next week if you're willing. There are family matters we should discuss." I nodded, surprised by the invitation, but understanding its importance. The Montgomery legacy, the legitimate parts worth preserving, would Need rebuilding. 1 year after that fateful anniversary dinner, I stood in the atrium of the newly renamed Bennett Foundation. The organization had been cleared of any connection to Richard's crimes and restructured under my direction. Its mission refocused on supporting victims of financial fraud and domestic abuse. Sarah and David were there, along with James and his family from Seattle. Even Catherine Liang had come, now a close friend, rather than just my attorney. To new beginnings, Sarah toasted, raising her glass. The gathered crowd, staff, board members, supporters, echoed the sentiment. Later, as the reception wound down, Claire joined me by the windows overlooking the city. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Reclaiming your life?" I considered the question. The divorce had been finalized months ago, the settlement enormous after Richard's criminal activities had been factored in. I'd moved to a new home, reconnected, with friends he'd isolated me from, expanded my design business into new territory. "Like waking up," I answered finally. "Painful at first, then increasingly clear." Claire nodded, understanding in her eyes. "The Bureau has officially closed the Montgomery case. My undercover work is done." She hesitated. "I'm transferring to the Seattle field office next month." "Seattle?" I couldn't hide my surprise. She smiled. "I thought perhaps we could have coffee sometime. As ourselves. No pretense, no ulterior motives." I found myself returning her smile. "I'd like that." That evening, after everyone had gone, I lingered in my office at the foundation. On my desk sat a framed photograph, not of Richard and me in happier times, but of my parents on their wedding day, a reminder of authenticity, of relationships built on truth rather than convenience or calculation. My phone buzzed with a message from Victoria. "Charles asked about you today. First time he's mentioned his father's special friend in months. Healing takes time. Thank you for your patience with him." Richard's brother-in-law had custody of his nephew now. Another life forever changed by Richard's choices. I closed my office, turning off the lights on the legacy Richard had corrupted and the new purpose I'd found in its place. The woman who'd walked into Le Pavilion 1 year ago no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and finally, after 20 years, truly free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. As we drove toward the Riverside district, I gazed out at the city lights, aware that somewhere among them, Richard was moving through his own evening routine, perhaps for the last time. Did he suspect yet that his carefully constructed exit strategy was being dismantled piece by piece? Was he already accelerating his plans to flee? The warehouse district was a study in contrasts. Some blocks modernized with trendy restaurants and luxury lofts, others still industrial and forbidding. We drove slowly along the river, Claire consulting a map based on the information I'd provided. "There," I said suddenly, pointing to a nondescript building with minimal signage. "Montgomery Historical Archives. That has to be it." Claire parked, a block away, instructing me to wait in the vehicle with Agent Rodriguez while she and the other agents conducted an initial reconnaissance. Through the window, I watched them disappear into the shadows, their movements precise and coordinated. 20 minutes later, Claire returned. "The building has security cameras and an alarm system, but minimal physical presence. No guards that we can detect. We've identified a service entrance with less surveillance coverage." "Do we need a warrant?" I asked, suddenly concerned about the legality of what we were doing. "We have probable cause based on the evidence discovered at the Foundation. Office and exigent circumstances given Richard's likely flight risk," Claire explained. "My supervisor has authorized this as a protective sweep. If we find evidence of criminal activity, we'll secure the premises and obtain a formal warrant for a thorough search." The operation proceeded with methodical efficiency. Agent Rodriguez stayed with the vehicle while Claire and I joined the other agents at the service entrance. Using specialized equipment, they bypassed the alarm system and gained entry to the building. Inside, the space was divided into what appeared to be legitimate archive storage on the main floor, rows of shelving containing boxes labeled with years and content descriptions, all related to Montgomery family history and business records. "This is just cover," Claire murmured, sweeping her flashlight across the carefully organized space. Where would he keep the real operation? I thought about Richard's tendencies. "Lower," I said confidently. "Richard always jokes about keeping valuables underground where they're safer. There must be a basement level." We found the access door behind a false panel in what appeared to be a supply closet. It led to a staircase descending into darkness, at the bottom of which was a reinforced door with another keypad lock. I tried the usual suspects: wedding date, father's birth date, the date he'd met Victoria. None worked. "Let me try something else," I said, thinking hard. What date would Richard consider significant enough for this level of security, but not obvious to anyone who knew him well? Then it came to me. "The day Montgomery Financial went public," I said, entering the date. "The day Richard officially surpassed his father's achievements." The lock disengaged with a soft beep. Beyond the door lay a space that bore no resemblance to the archival storage above. This was a high-tech operations center. Computer workstations, servers humming softly, large monitors mounted on walls, and most tellingly, a sophisticated device Claire identified as a high-speed currency counter. "This is it," she said quietly, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "This is the heart of the money laundering operation." As Claire's team documented the space, I wandered to a desk in the corner that seemed different from the others, more personal, with a leather chair and an expensive lamp. Richard's workspace, I guessed. On the surface lay an open leather portfolio containing flight information for a private charter to Asunción, Paraguay, scheduled for the following evening. "Claire," I called, pointing to the document. "He's planning to leave tomorrow night." She examined the information carefully. "This changes our timeline. We'll need to coordinate with the airport authorities to ensure he doesn't slip away." While she made urgent calls to her supervisors, I continued exploring the space, opening drawers and examining shelves. In a filing cabinet beside Richard's desk, I found a folder labeled simply EM. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. Surveillance photos of me over the past 6 months, detailed reports on my daily routines and activities, and most disturbingly, a contingency plan titled Spousal Liability Mitigation. The clinical language couldn't disguise the document's true purpose: a step-by-step plan for discrediting me if I became suspicious, including the manufactured evidence of infidelity I'd already discovered, and more sinister options if that failed. The final page included a section headed Terminal Solution, with a notation referencing untraceable compounds and natural causes presentation. My hands trembled as I showed the document to Claire. "He was planning to kill me," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "If I became a liability, he had a plan to eliminate me." Claire read the document, her professional composure slipping momentarily as she processed its contents. "This elevates everything," she said finally, her voice hard. "This isn't just financial crime anymore. This is conspiracy to commit murder." The reality of my situation crashed over me in waves. For months, perhaps years, I'd been living with a man who viewed me as a potential liability to be managed and, if necessary, eliminated. Every morning I'd woken beside him. Every meal we'd shared. Every mundane moment of married life had been shadowed by this terrible contingency he'd kept in reserve. "We need to get you to a secure location immediately," Claire said, already moving toward the exit. "This document suggests Richard has connections to people who could carry out this terminal solution. You're no longer safe in the city." As we hurriedly left the warehouse, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Richard. Eleanor. Your continued absence is concerning. I've spoken with Dr. Reynolds, who believes you may be experiencing a psychological break. For your own safety, I've arranged for a private medical transport to take you to the Pines for evaluation when you return. This is for your own good. The Pines was an exclusive psychiatric facility outside the city. The perfect place, I realized with growing horror, to administer untraceable compounds that would present as natural causes. I showed Claire the message. He's already setting the stage, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the fear coursing through me. Making it look like I'm unstable, so no one will question my sudden death. Claire's expression hardened. This ends tonight. Richard Montgomery just graduated from person of interest to our primary target. As we drove away from the warehouse, lights suddenly blazed behind us. A vehicle approaching at high speed, headlights on bright. We're being followed, Agent Rodriguez announced tersely, accelerating and taking a sharp turn onto a side street. The pursuing vehicle matched our turn, gaining on us rapidly. Richard's security chief, I realized aloud. Marcus Dalton. He must have been monitoring the warehouse remotely. Claire pulled out her service weapon, checking it efficiently. Rodriguez, evasive action. Get Ms. Bennett to the safe house. I'll call for backup. As Rodriguez executed a series of precise turns designed to shake our pursuer, I gripped the door handle, heart pounding. Just 24 hours ago, I'd been preparing for an anniversary dinner. Now I was fleeing for my life, pursued by agents. Of my own husband. The SUV swerved sharply onto a main thoroughfare, momentarily losing our tail in the heavier traffic. Claire used the opportunity to make rapid-fire calls, coordinating with other FBI units positioned throughout the city. There's a tactical team 3 minutes out, she reported, and I've alerted airport security about the flight to Paraguay. If Richard tries to leave tonight instead of tomorrow, he'll be intercepted. I nodded, trying to focus on these procedural details rather than the larger implications of everything we'd discovered. The man I'd loved, or thought I'd loved, was not just a faithless husband, but a criminal willing to have me killed if I threatened his operation. How had I missed the signs? Had there been clues I'd overlooked, warnings I'd dismissed? Or had Richard been so compartmentalized, so skilled at maintaining his facade, that no one could have seen through it? As these questions tumbled through my mind, Rodriguez made another sharp turn, directly into an ambush. A second vehicle blocked the narrow street ahead, its high beams blinding us momentarily. Down, Claire shouted as the first shots shattered our windshield. I ducked below the dashboard, heart hammering in my ears as Rodriguez executed a rapid reverse maneuver, only to find our original pursuer now blocking our retreat. Caught between two vehicles, windows spiderwebbed with bullet impacts, I realized that Richard's terminal solution was being implemented now. Not in the controlled environment of a private clinic, but in the chaotic violence of an urban street. 20 years of marriage, ending not with divorce papers, but with gunfire in the night. What happened next would leave not just Richard's family speechless, but would forever alter the course of lives I hadn't even known were connected to mine. As Claire returned fire and Rodriguez radioed our position to the approaching tactical team, I made a silent promise to myself. If I survived this night, I would never again be the woman who didn't see, who didn't question, who accepted the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. That woman had died the moment I walked into Le Pavilion and saw Richard with Chloe. We spent the next hour developing a plan for accessing the Montgomery Foundation offices and the potential storage facility in the Riverside district. Claire coordinated with her team via encrypted communications, occasionally stepping out of the room for private conversations. Catherine and James Prescott helped me organize my legal affairs to ensure I could operate remotely if necessary. By 5:30 p.m., we were ready to move. I gathered my things, feeling a strange disconnect between The ordinary actions of putting on a coat and checking my phone, and the extraordinary circumstances that had brought me here. "Eleanor," Catherine said as we prepared to leave, "are you absolutely certain about this? Once we proceed, there's no turning back." I thought about the moment in Le Pavilion when I'd seen Richard with Chloe, the shock, the hurt, the sudden clarity. That moment had already set me on an irreversible path. Today's revelations had only changed the destination. "I'm certain," I replied. "I need to know the truth, all of it, no matter where it leads." Outside Catherine's building, a nondescript black SUV waited, driven by a man Claire introduced simply as Agent Rodriguez. We drove in silence through the evening traffic toward the Montgomery Foundation's offices in the historic district of the city. The foundation occupied a meticulously restored Victorian mansion, its imposing facade preserved as a testament to old money and respectable philanthropy. Richard had always been proud of the building, viewing it as a physical manifestation of the Montgomery legacy. A legacy that, I now understood, he had been secretly corrupting from within. I used my keycard to access the side entrance, leading Claire and 2 additional agents through the quiet, darkened hallways. Most of the Foundation's staff had gone home, though security lights cast long shadows across the ornate woodwork and period furnishings. "Richard's private office is on the 3rd floor," I explained as we climbed the grand staircase. "It was originally the master bedroom when this was a private residence. Does it have additional security beyond the building's system?" Claire asked. "Yes, a separate keypad and biometric scanner. But I have the override code. Richard gave it to me years ago in case of emergency, then presumably forgot about it." The 3rd floor was silent as we approached the heavy oak door marked, "R. Montgomery, Chairman." I entered the override code, Richard's father's birth date, and heard the soft click of the lock disengaging. Richard's foundation office was a study in careful image construction. Unlike his modern, minimalist corporate office, this space was designed to evoke old-world authority: leather-bound books, antique maps, oil paintings of stern-looking Montgomery ancestors. A large desk dominated the room, its surface immaculate except for a single leather portfolio. "We'll need to document everything before we touch it," Claire said, gesturing to her team. The agents moved efficiently around the room, photographing the layout and taking notes on the contents. "What exactly are we looking for?" I asked. "Documentation of financial transfers, evidence of communication with co-conspirators, anything that might indicate his exit strategy," Claire explained. "Richard would likely keep any sensitive information well hidden." I studied the room, trying to see it with fresh eyes. For years, I'd visited this office without really examining it. Another example of how I'd stopped truly seeing aspects of Richard's life. The desk would be too obvious, I mused aloud. Richard appreciates subtlety. My eyes fell on the oil painting behind the desk, a portrait of Richard's great-grandfather, the first Montgomery to establish significant wealth. The frame was ornate, perhaps unnecessarily so for the rather mediocre painting. "That frame," I said, pointing. "It's new. Richard replaced it about 6 months ago, saying the old one wasn't substantial enough." Claire approached the painting, examining it carefully without touching it. "It does seem unusually deep for a standard frame." She glanced at me. "Would you mind?" I nodded, stepping forward to lift the painting from the wall. It was heavier than it should have been, and as I removed it, the reason became clear. The back of the frame had been modified to create a hidden compartment, within which sat a sleek metal safe. "Biometric lock," Claire observed. "We'll need a specialist to open it without damaging the contents." "Or me," I said, studying the safe. "Look, there's a manual override keypad. Richard always uses the same backup codes for everything." Claire hesitated. "If you try incorrect codes, it might trigger a security alert." "I won't need multiple attempts." I entered our wedding date, but the safe remained locked. Frowning, I considered alternative possibilities. Richard's father's birth date had already worked on the door. I tried his mother's birth date next, with no success. Then a thought occurred to me, unpleasant but worth trying. I entered the date Richard had first met Victoria, his administrative assistant from 5 years ago, with whom I'd suspected he'd had a brief affair. The safe clicked open. "How did you know?" Claire asked, clearly impressed. "Richard uses meaningful dates as his codes, but only ones that matter to him personally," I explained, fighting back a wave of bitterness. Apparently, that day was significant, enough to remember. Inside the safe were several USB drives, a stack of passports, and a small leather-bound book. Claire carefully removed each item, photographing them in place before extraction. "Multiple identities," she murmured, flipping through the passports. Each contained Richard's photograph but different names and nationalities. "And what appears to be account information." She indicated the leather book, which contained handwritten strings of numbers and codes. While Claire's team documented the safe's contents, I continued examining the office, looking for anything else Richard might have hidden. Near the window, an antique globe sat on an ornate stand. I'd always assumed it was purely decorative, but now I spun it thoughtfully, noting how smoothly it rotated on its axis. "There's something off about this," I said, running my fingers along the surface of the countries. When I reached Russia, I felt a slight depression that shouldn't have been there. Pressing it experimentally, I heard a soft click. The globe's northern hemisphere separated from the southern along the equator line, revealing a hidden compartment containing a satellite phone and a thick envelope. "Here," I called to Claire, who quickly joined me. She photographed the discovery before carefully removing the items. The envelope contained $50,000 in various currencies and a handwritten list of names and phone numbers without any identifying information. "About who they might be? This is significant," Claire said, her professional demeanor slipping enough to reveal genuine excitement. "This could be his emergency contact list. Fixers, transportation arrangements, safe house locations." As her team continued processing the discoveries, I wandered to the bookshelves lining one wall. Most of the volumes were for show, impressive-looking legal tomes and historical biographies that Richard had probably never read, but one section contained books I knew he genuinely valued, first editions of financial histories and biographies of successful businessmen he admired. I removed a copy of The House of Morgan, recalling how Richard had once called it his business Bible. As I flipped through it absently, a folded document fell from between its pages. Unfolding it revealed a detailed map of a compound in what appeared to be a remote location, with handwritten notes in Richard's distinctive script. At the top was written, "Contingency Location C, Paraguay." "Claire," I called, my voice unsteady. "I think I've found his bolt hole." She took the map, studying it intently. "This is exactly what we've been looking for. A prepared escape location, off the grid, in a country with limited extradition agreements." For the next hour, we continued searching the office, finding additional evidence of Richard's preparation for a potential hasty departure. Cryptocurrency wallet information hidden in a false bottom of a desk drawer. A list of private banking. Contacts in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and Singapore concealed within a hollowed-out book. And most disturbingly, a small case containing syringes and vials of what Claire suspected might be emergency medications or possibly something more sinister. By the time we finished, my image of Richard had transformed completely. The man I'd married, ambitious, controlling, but fundamentally operating within the bounds of legitimate business, had been replaced by a stranger. A criminal prepared to flee at a moment's notice, equipped with false identities and hidden resources. "We should move to the warehouse location next," Claire said, checking her watch. "It's nearly 8 p.m. The area should be relatively quiet." As we prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with a text message. I checked it automatically, then froze. "Where are you? We need to talk. Coming home now." Our Claire noticed my expression. "What is it?" I showed her the message. "Richard's heading to the penthouse. He expects to find me there." "This could work to our advantage," she said thoughtfully. "If he's focused on finding you at home, it gives us more time to check the warehouse without interference." "Or he could be setting a trap," I countered, "checking if I'm following his instructions to return home." Claire considered this. "Either way, we need to proceed carefully. I'll have agents monitor the penthouse discreetly to track his movements. Then perhaps we should find out what that strategy is before he has a chance to execute it." Catherine stood. "I'll bring Agent Williams back in. But Eleanor—" She paused, her expression softening slightly. "Are you prepared for where this might lead? Criminal investigations can be brutal, especially when they involve family members." I thought about the divorce papers hidden in Richard's desk, the doctored photos he'd prepared to frame me for infidelity, the 20 years I'd spent building a life with a man who had been planning to discard me. "I'm prepared," I said. "Whatever Richard's involved in, I want the truth." Catherine nodded, then opened the door to call Claire back in. As the agent took her seat, I realized that the path forward had just become infinitely more complex and potentially more dangerous than I'd imagined when I walked into Le Pavilion 24 hours ago. But one thing was clear. Richard's carefully constructed world was about to collapse entirely, and this time, I wouldn't be going down with it. "We need to move quickly," Claire said, spreading a small map across Catherine's conference table. "Based on our intelligence, Richard has connections to a private airfield outside the city. If he suspects his position is compromised, he could be gone within hours." I studied the woman across from me, still trying to reconcile the seductive blonde from Le Pavilion with this focused federal agent. "How did you get close to him?" Richard is usually cautious about new people. "We created a perfect opportunity," Claire explained. "Meridian Financial handles accounts for several entities we've been monitoring. When their previous marketing director retired, we positioned me as an ideal replacement. Young, ambitious, with a background that would appeal to Richard. And susceptible to his particular brand of charm," I added, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Claire's expression softened momentarily. "For what it's worth, he spoke of you often. Always respectfully, at least on the surface. While planning to frame me for adultery and leave me with a fraction of what I'm entitled to," I replied. "Let's not pretend there was any real respect there," Catherine interjected, bringing us back to more practical matters. "What exactly do you need from my client, Agent Williams?" "Access to any properties or storage facilities Richard might maintain separately from your shared residences," Claire said. "Information about patterns or habits that might indicate where he keeps his contingency plans. And your help identifying anyone in his inner circle who might assist in his departure." I considered this. Richard maintains a private office at the Montgomery Foundation, separate from Montgomery Industries. It's where his father used to work before he died. The foundation is technically a charitable organization, so it operates independently from the corporate structure. Claire made a note. "Would you have access to that office?" "Yes. I'm a trustee of the foundation, at least nominally." "Richard keeps that role active for me because it looks good for philanthropic events." "What about properties?" Catherine asked. "Any locations Richard might have purchased without your knowledge?" I thought carefully. "Nothing I know of definitely, but—" I paused, remembering something. About 3 years ago, Richard took a particular interest in a warehouse district being redeveloped downtown. He mentioned something about secure storage for sensitive materials when I asked about it. Claire looked up sharply. "Do you remember? Where exactly?" "The Riverside district, near the old shipping terminals. I don't know specific addresses, but it was an area the city was rezoning from industrial to mixed use." "That's helpful," Claire said, making another note. "What about people? Who would Richard trust if he needed to make a quick exit? This was harder. For all his social connections, Richard kept very few people genuinely close. His security chief, Marcus Dalton, former military, completely loyal to Richard, and possibly his personal banker, Jeffrey Palmer at First Meridian Private Banking. Palmer is already on our radar, Claire confirmed. Dalton isn't. That's valuable intelligence. Catherine had been taking her own notes throughout this exchange. Now she looked up. Before we proceed further, I need assurances about my client's position. What guarantees can you provide that cooperating won't somehow implicate her in these activities? Claire reached into her briefcase and removed an official-looking document. This is a proffer agreement from the U.S. Attorney's Office. It guarantees immunity for Ms. Bennett in exchange for her cooperation, provided she has not knowingly participated in any illegal activities. I skimmed the document, then passed it to Catherine, who read it with a practiced eye. This looks standard, Catherine said finally, but I'd like our white-collar specialist to review it before Ms. Bennett signs anything. Understood, Claire nodded. But time is of the essence. How quickly can your specialist review it? I'll call him now. He can be here within the hour. Catherine stood, excusing herself to make the call from her office. Left alone with Claire, I found myself studying her more carefully. Without the artifice of her Chloe persona, she appeared both younger and somehow harder, a woman accustomed to navigating dangerous situations. How long have you been investigating Richard? I asked. I was assigned to this case 18 months ago, she replied. But the investigation began before that, with suspicious transaction patterns flagged by FinCEN. And in all that time, you never considered warning me? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. I was making life plans based on a marriage that was apparently a sham on multiple levels. Claire met my gaze directly. We couldn't risk compromising the investigation. Richard isn't the only target. He's part of a network that moves money for some very dangerous people. If he had been tipped off, not only would the suspects have vanished, but people connected to the investigation could have been in physical danger. People like me, you mean? Yes. Her answer was simple and unvarnished. Once we identified the scope of the operation, we realized the potential risk to associates and family members of the primary suspects. This was another dimension I hadn't considered, that Richard's activities might have placed me in actual danger. The thought sent a chill through me. These people Richard works with, I asked carefully. How dangerous are they? Claire hesitated, clearly weighing how much to tell me. The money being moved appears to be connected to international arms dealers and several drug cartels. These aren't organizations known for their forgiveness when things go wrong. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my water glass. 20 years married to a man who had apparently been consorting with arms dealers and drug cartels. How was it possible to share a bed, a home, a life with someone and not know them at all? Catherine returned, accompanied by a grave-looking man she introduced as James Prescott, the firm's white-collar crime specialist. He examined the proffer agreement thoroughly, occasionally consulting quietly with Catherine, before finally nodding his approval. The terms are solid, he confirmed. This provides comprehensive immunity for any activities Ms. Bennett may have unwittingly facilitated through her relationship with Richard Montgomery, provided she cooperates fully and has not knowingly participated in any criminal acts. I signed the agreement with a steady hand, feeling the weight of the decision. There was no going back now. I was officially part of a federal investigation into my own husband's criminal activities. What happens next? I asked as Claire countersigned the document. We need to move on the Montgomery Foundation office and any other locations Richard might use for secure storage, she replied. How soon can you take us there? I checked my watch. The Foundation offices close at 5 p.m. It's 3:30 now. If we go after hours, we'll have more privacy. Claire nodded. That works. In the meantime, I need to bring in my supervisor to coordinate the operation. And Ms. Bennett will need to place you under protective surveillance, given the potential risks. Protective surveillance? Agents who will ensure your safety without being obvious. Given your cooperation and Richard's connections, we can't rule out the possibility that he might take drastic measures if he feels cornered. The implication hung in the air. Richard might actually try to harm me if he discovered I was working with federal investigators. The man I'd married, the man I'd loved, might view me as a threat to be eliminated. Catherine touched my arm gently. You can stay at my lake house. It's secure, secluded, and not connected to you in any public records. Thank you, I said, grateful for her offer but still struggling to process this new reality. But I think I should stay somewhere Richard wouldn't think to look for me at all. I turned to Claire. Does the FBI have safe houses? We do, but they're typically reserved for witnesses in imminent danger. And I don't qualify yet? I asked with grim humor. Claire's expression remained professional. At this point, we have no specific intelligence suggesting Richard would target you physically, but we don't take chances. I have another option, I said, thinking quickly. My brother James in Seattle. Richard hasn't spoken to him in years. They had a falling out over Richard's treatment of me. James has a guest house on his property that Richard doesn't know about. Catherine nodded approvingly. That's actually an excellent option. Familiar surroundings with someone you trust, but far from Richard's sphere of influence. I can arrange secure transportation to Seattle once we've completed tonight's operation, Claire offered. Yet something about it nagged at me. The way Richard had introduced Chloe at dinner, clearly unprepared for my appearance. Her apparent surprise when I mentioned our anniversary. The Shell Corporation payments that seemed too obvious for someone as usually careful as Richard. I texted back, I'll need verification of your identity. Of course. There's a Starbucks on 7th and Pine. I can meet you there in 30 minutes. I'll bring my credentials. I hesitated, then replied, I'll bring my attorney. That's fine. This concerns her client's legal interests anyway. I called Catherine immediately, half expecting her to dismiss the message as an obvious ploy. Instead, she was intrigued. It's unlikely but not impossible, she said after I'd read her the exchange. Financial crimes investigations can involve elaborate undercover operations, especially when they suspect insider trading or securities. Fraud. So you think I should meet her? Yes, but not at a public Starbucks. Have her come to my office. If she's legitimate, she won't object to presenting her credentials in a more controlled setting. I texted Chloe the change of venue. Her response was immediate acceptance, which lent credibility to her claim. Someone trying to manipulate me would likely have pushed back. I arrived at Catherine's office 15 minutes before the scheduled meeting, still trying to process this potential twist. If Chloe was telling the truth, what exactly was the FBI investigating? And how long had Richard been under surveillance? Catherine met me in the reception area, looking as impeccable as she had that morning, despite what must have been a grueling day of emergency court filings. Our investigator found something interesting about Chloe Winters, she said without preamble. Her employment at Meridian Financial only began 6 months ago, with no prior industry experience we can trace. Before that, there's very little digital footprint, just enough to seem legitimate without providing any substance. That could support her claim of being undercover, Catherine nodded. It could. Or it could mean she's using a carefully constructed false identity for other reasons. We didn't have time to speculate further. The receptionist announced Chloe's arrival, and moments later, she walked in, a different woman from the one I met at Le Pavilion. Gone was the form-fitting red dress and perfect makeup. Instead, she wore a simple black pantsuit, her hair pulled back, her expression professionally neutral. She extended her hand first to Catherine, then to me. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I understand your skepticism. Without preamble, she removed a leather wallet from her jacket, flipping it open to reveal a federal badge and identification card. Special Agent Claire Williams, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Catherine examined the credentials carefully before returning them. What exactly is the Financial Crimes Division investigating that involves my client's husband? Let's discuss this somewhere private, Claire, not Chloe, suggested. Catherine led us to her conference room, closing the door firmly behind us. Once seated, Claire placed a slim file on the table. For the past 18 months, we've been investigating a complex money laundering operation involving several financial institutions, including Montgomery Industries. We believe Richard Montgomery is a key facilitator in moving funds from offshore accounts back into the U.S. financial system, disguised as legitimate investments. I felt a chill run through me. Money laundering. The word seemed impossible to connect with Richard, who projected such legitimate success. That's a serious accusation, Catherine said. What evidence do you have? Claire opened the file, removing several documents. We've tracked a pattern of investments coming through shell companies, primarily based in the Cayman Islands and Bermuda. These investments flow into Montgomery Industries, are cleaned through various internal transfers, then emerge as legitimate returns to seemingly unrelated parties. She slid a diagram across the table. It's sophisticated and would be nearly undetectable if we hadn't been tipped off by unusual transaction patterns. I studied the diagram, recognizing several company names from documents I'd seen in Richard's office over the years. Names I'd dismissed as just more corporate entities in the complex world of finance. How does this relate to Winterland Enterprises? I asked. Claire's expression shifted slightly. Surprise, perhaps, that I knew the name. Winterland was my cover. As Chloe Winters, I was positioned at Meridian Financial to track transactions between Montgomery Industries and several client accounts. The consulting fees Richard arranged were actually a way for us to access internal financial systems without raising flags. So at dinner last night, I began. I was there in my undercover capacity, she confirmed. Richard believed he was grooming me as an accomplice, someone who could help expand the operation to Meridian's client base. Your arrival was unexpected. For both of us, I said dryly. Catherine leaned forward. Why are you revealing this? Investigation to my client now? Doesn't this compromise your operation? Claire closed the file. 2 reasons. First, Ms. Bennett's actions this morning at the board meeting have effectively frozen several accounts we've been monitoring. While this may ultimately help our case by preserving evidence, it's disrupted our surveillance timeline. And the second reason? I asked. We believe Richard Montgomery has become aware that he's under investigation. His recent attempts to move assets, including those offshore accounts you discovered, suggest he's preparing to disappear. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Richard wasn't just planning to divorce me. He was planning to vanish entirely, leaving behind whatever legal troubles were closing in on him. How long have you known about these offshore accounts? Catherine asked, her tone sharpening. My client only discovered them yesterday. We've been tracking them for approximately 3 months, Claire answered. But we couldn't move until we identified all parties involved in the larger scheme. While my client's financial future hung in the balance, Catherine noted coldly. Convenient. Claire didn't flinch. We understand this is difficult, but this investigation goes beyond one marriage. The operation we're tracking has moved over $200 million of suspected criminal proceeds into legitimate financial institutions. I felt suddenly lightheaded. The scope of what she was describing dwarfed my concerns about divorce settlements and prenuptial agreements. If Richard was involved in money laundering on this scale, everything I thought I knew about our life together was a lie. What happens now? I asked quietly. We believe Richard is planning to leave the country within the next 72 hours, Claire said. Your court action freezing his assets has complicated his plans, but he likely has resources we haven't identified yet. And you want my help, I concluded. Claire nodded. You have unique access and knowledge that could be invaluable. Specifically, we need to identify where Richard keeps his emergency contingency plans. Most people in his position have detailed exit strategies, alternative identities, cash reserves, transportation arrangements. And what does my client receive in exchange for this cooperation? Catherine interjected. Immunity from prosecution for any unwitting involvement in money laundering activities, Claire replied promptly. And our support in ensuring she receives her fair share of all legitimate marital assets once they're disentangled from the criminal proceeds. Catherine and I exchanged glances. This changed everything about my divorce strategy. No longer was I simply facing a philandering husband trying to shortchange me. I was potentially entangled in a major federal investigation. I need to speak with my client privately, Catherine said. Claire stood. Of course, I'll wait outside. When the door closed behind her, Catherine turned to me. This is an unexpected development, to put it mildly. I laughed, the sound slightly hysterical even to my own ears. That's one way of putting it. My husband isn't just a cheater. He's potentially a criminal mastermind. We don't know the full extent of his involvement yet, Catherine cautioned. But this does explain why he's been so aggressively moving assets. If he's facing potential federal charges, divorce proceedings are the least of his concerns. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Do you think I should cooperate with them? Catherine considered this carefully. From a strategic perspective, aligning with federal investigators gives you significant leverage. If Richard is indeed planning to flee, our civil actions may not be enough to stop him. The FBI has considerably more resources. And if I help them and they arrest Richard, what happens to Montgomery Industries? To our assets? That's complicated. Assets directly linked to criminal activity could be seized, but legitimate assets would still be subject to division through divorce proceedings. She tapped her pen thoughtfully against the table. Though I suspect the FBI agent is right about one thing. Richard probably has resources hidden that even they haven't found yet. Resources he would abandon if forced to flee hastily. I thought about the man I'd been married to for 20 years, his meticulous planning, his attention to detail, his contingency for every contingency. He would absolutely have an exit strategy. Richard plans for everything. These are baseless accusations, he said through gritted teeth. Eleanor has no evidence of any improper relationship. I reached into my purse one last time, removing my phone. Actually, I do. I opened my photos and turned the screen toward the board. This was taken last night at Le Pavilion, where Richard and Ms. Winters were dining together, on our 20th wedding anniversary. The image showed Richard and Chloe, his hand covering hers on the table, their posture unmistakably intimate. I'd asked the restaurant's maître d' to send it to me this morning. He'd been only too happy to help after I'd explained the situation. Edwin cleared his throat, the discomfort in the room now palpable. Richard, perhaps we should reconvene after you've had a chance to address these concerns. This is ridiculous, Richard protested, his composure slipping. You're halting a critical board meeting because my wife is jealous of a business associate? A business associate receiving consulting fees through an undisclosed shell corporation, I corrected. The SEC tends to take interest in such arrangements, as do shareholders. The mention of the SEC had the intended effect. Board members exchanged alarmed glances. Montgomery Industries had weathered a minor scandal just last year when a junior executive was caught in an insider trading scheme. Another investigation would devastate investor confidence. Edwin stood, a clear indication that the meeting was over. We'll reconvene tomorrow at 2 p.m. Richard, I expect a full explanation of these transactions by then. He turned to me. Ms. Bennett, thank you for bringing this to our attention. I nodded graciously. I only want what's best for the company, Edwin. It's been part of my life for 20 years, after all. Board members filed out, some avoiding eye contact, others shooting curious glances between Richard and me. When the last one had gone, Richard slammed the door shut, rounding on me with naked fury. "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" he hissed, advancing toward me. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" I stood my ground, refusing to be intimidated. "I believe I've just prevented you from using company resources to fund your affair and potentially defraud me in our divorce." He laughed, the sound harsh and without humor. "You think this little stunt helps your position? You've just torpedoed the company stock. The board will never forgive that. The board will survive learning that their CEO has been misappropriating funds. Whether your reputation will survive is another question entirely." Richard's face contorted with rage. For a moment, I thought he might actually strike me. Instead, he moved to the bar cart in the corner of the room, pouring himself a generous measure of scotch despite the early hour. "You know nothing about business, Eleanor. Nothing about what it takes to run a company like this." "I know enough about ethics to recognize when they're being violated," I replied. "And enough about marriage to recognize when it's been irrevocably broken." He drained his glass, then turned to face me. "What do you want? Money? Is that it? Name your price, and we can end this circus right now." The question was so predictably Richard that I almost laughed. Always reducing complex human emotions to financial transactions. "What I want," I said quietly, "is justice. For 20 years of dedication to a man who was planning to discard me while framing me for adultery to avoid paying what I'm legally entitled to." Richard's eyes narrowed. "You were in my study. You had no right. I had every right to protect myself once I discovered your betrayal." I cut him off. "Just as I have every right to inform the board about potential financial improprieties. That could affect shareholders." He slammed his glass down. "This vindictive crusade will destroy everything I've built." "No, Richard. You did that yourself when you decided to funnel company money to your mistress and plot against your wife." I moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to him. "By the way, Catherine Liang sends her regards. She's quite looking forward to representing me in our divorce." The color drained from Richard's face. Catherine's reputation preceded her, particularly among wealthy men who'd tried to shortchange their ex-wives. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "When this is over, you'll have nothing. I'll make sure of it." I met his gaze steadily. Interesting threat to make when your corporate accounts have been frozen and the board is questioning your judgment. "I'd be careful about making enemies right now, Richard. You seem to be collecting them rather efficiently." I left him standing there, his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble around him. In the reception area, Meredith was gathering her things, a cardboard box on her desk. "Are you leaving?" I asked, surprised. She nodded. "Richard fired me as soon as the board members were gone. Said I betrayed him by letting you in." A flash of guilt went through me. "Meredith, I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to lose your job." She smiled, and there was something almost relieved in her expression. "Don't be. I've been looking for a way out for months. Working for Richard has been—" She trailed off, clearly searching for a diplomatic term. "Hell?" I supplied. Her smile widened. I was going to say challenging, but yes, hell works too. I reached into my purse for one of my business cards, then wrote Catherine's number on the back. "My attorney might want to speak with you about Richard's business practices, and if you need employment references or help finding a new position, please call me." Meredith accepted the card, tucking it carefully into her wallet. "I might just do that." She hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, Ms. Bennett, I'm sorry about what happened. You deserved better." "Thank you, Meredith. And so did you." I rode the elevator down alone, my heartbeat finally beginning to slow. The confrontation had gone almost exactly as I'd planned, yet I felt no triumph, only a weary sort of clarity. 20 years of marriage, ending in recriminations and threats in a sterile conference room, not with a loving goodbye, but with the cold machinery of courts and corporate politics. Outside Montgomery Industries, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Catherine, no doubt updating me on the court proceedings. A text from Sarah asking how I was holding up. And most surprisingly, a voicemail from Victoria Montgomery. I found a quiet coffee shop a block away before listening to Victoria's message, ordering a cappuccino and settling into a corner table. Eleanor? Victoria's crisp Boston accent was as familiar as it was distant. We'd never been close, her New England reserve clashing with what she called my emotional Southern nature. Richard has informed me of your difficulties. While I don't presume to understand what's happening in your marriage, I do hope you'll reconsider this public approach. The Montgomery name has always stood for dignity and discretion. Call me when you can. I deleted the message without replying. Victoria had always valued appearances above all else, including her son's character. When Richard was 12, he'd been caught stealing from a school fundraiser. Victoria's concern hadn't been his moral development, but ensuring the incident didn't affect his chances at the right prep school. I called Catherine next, who answered on the first ring. Eleanor, I've been trying to reach you. I know, I'm sorry. I had a meeting at Montgomery Industries. A brief pause. Please tell me you didn't confront Richard without counsel present. Not exactly confront, I hedged. More like, inform the board about potential financial irregularities they should be aware of. Catherine's sigh was eloquent in its exasperation. While I admire your initiative, we generally prefer a more controlled approach to corporate disclosures during divorce proceedings. It wasn't planned, I admitted. But when I learned the board was meeting this morning, I saw an opportunity to establish leverage. And did you? I believe so. Richard's been paying his mistress through a shell corporation using company funds. The board is concerned, to say the least. Catherine was quiet for a moment. That's actually quite significant. Corporate misappropriation could trigger clawback provisions, not to mention potential SEC investigations. Her tone shifted from exasperation to reluctant approval. Send me everything you have on these transactions. And Eleanor? Yes? Next. Time. Call me before making a move like this. I appreciate your initiative, but we're stronger working in tandem. Understood. After hanging up, I sipped my cappuccino and gazed out the window at Montgomery Industries towering over the city. For 20 years, that building had symbolized Richard's power and status, and by extension, my own position as his wife. Now it represented something entirely different. A fortress I was laying siege to, one strategic move at a time. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Chloe Winters. We need to talk. Urgently. Please. I considered ignoring it, as I had her previous messages, but curiosity got the better of me. What could we possibly have to discuss? Her response came immediately. Richard isn't who you think he is. Neither am I. There's more happening than you understand. I frowned at the cryptic message. If you're looking for sympathy after losing your consulting contract, you've contacted the wrong person. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. Was never Richard's mistress. I'm an investigator with the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. We need to meet. I nearly dropped my phone, reading the message twice to ensure I'd understood correctly. An FBI investigator? It seemed far-fetched. Exactly. The kind of desperate lie someone might tell when caught in an affair. Charlotte has no interest in the business, I said, and Victoria has always been distant. I doubt they'll intervene. Nevertheless, I suggest we prepare for any possibility. Richard may try to rally family support, present himself as the victim. She gestured to my phone. Have you received any additional communication from him since last night? I pulled up the latest messages. There were 3 more emails, each progressively less controlled. Eleanor, your continued silence is childish and concerning. Call me immediately. I've spoken with Dr. Reynolds. He agrees that this behavior suggests an emotional crisis. I'm considering your options for treatment. Security informs me you accessed my study before leaving. If you've removed any confidential documents, this constitutes theft and corporate espionage. Think carefully about your next move. Catherine, read them without expression, then handed the phone back. He's escalating, moving from attempts to control and invalidate you to outright threats. This actually works in our favor. It establishes a pattern of emotional manipulation. She checked her watch, then stood. I need to file these petitions immediately. I suggest you don't return to the penthouse yet, not until we have the temporary orders in place. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? I'm with friends, and I have an apartment Richard doesn't know about. Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly. Excellent foresight. Make sure your friends understand not to discuss your whereabouts with anyone, including people claiming to be concerned about your welfare. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a new email notification. I glanced down. Not Richard this time, but Victoria Montgomery. The subject line read simply, "Concerned." I showed it to Catherine, who nodded. It begins. Don't respond until we've developed a strategy for family communications. She walked me to the door. I'll call you once the petitions are filed. Until then, maintain radio silence with Richard and anyone associated with him. As I stepped into the hallway, Catherine added, Eleanor, one more thing. The coming weeks will be difficult. Richard will use every weapon in his arsenal: emotional manipulation, financial pressure, mutual friends, perhaps even your professional reputation. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the woman I'd been just 24 hours earlier, carefully selecting a dress for an anniversary dinner, still believing in the marriage I thought I had. That woman had been afraid of Richard's disapproval, of being alone, of facing an uncertain future. I wasn't that woman anymore. Yes, I said with quiet certainty. I'm prepared. Outside Catherine's building, I checked my phone again. 3 missed calls from Victoria Montgomery. A text message from a number I didn't recognize. Eleanor, this is Chloe. We need to talk. Please. The audacity was almost impressive. I deleted Chloe's message without responding and hailed a taxi. First Republic Bank, I instructed the driver, then reconsidered. Actually, Montgomery Plaza, please. The driver nodded, pulling into traffic. I watched the city slide past, mentally preparing for my next move. Catherine had advised against returning to the penthouse, but I wasn't going home. I was going to Richard's office. It was time to meet the enemy on his own territory. The Montgomery Industries headquarters dominated the downtown skyline. 63 stories of gleaming glass and steel, a monument to Richard's family legacy and the empire he'd expanded. I'd visited countless times for charity galas and holiday parties, always as Richard Montgomery's wife, a carefully accessorized extension of his brand. Today, I arrived as Eleanor Bennett, my maiden name reclaimed like a forgotten treasure. The security guard at the lobby desk did a double-take when I presented my ID. Mrs. Montgomery? I'm sorry, Ms. Bennett? That's right, Frank. I smiled, remembering how Richard would barely acknowledge the security staff. I have a 10 a.m. appointment with the board. Frank checked his computer, his eyes widening slightly. Yes, I see it here. They're in the main conference room on 62. He handed me a visitor badge, his expression curious but professional. It's, good to see you, ma'am. Thank you, Frank. How's your daughter doing at college? His face brightened with surprise that I'd remembered. She made Dean's List last semester, first in our family to go to university. That's wonderful. Please give her my congratulations. As I rode the executive elevator, I reflected on how many small human connections I'd neglected over the years, following Richard's example of treating service staff as furniture. Another piece of myself I was reclaiming. The elevator doors opened, directly into the executive reception area on the 62nd floor. Meredith Parker sat at her desk, her posture perfect as always, her expression carefully neutral as she looked up from her computer. "Eleanor," she said, rising. "Not Mrs. Montgomery." "Interesting. I didn't realize you had an appointment today." "It was arranged last minute," I replied, keeping my tone pleasant but firm. "I understand the board is meeting?" Meredith's eyes darted toward the closed double doors of the main conference room, then back to me. "Yes, but—" She lowered her voice. "Richard specifically instructed that you weren't to be admitted if you showed up." "Did he?" I stepped closer to her desk. "Meredith, how long have we known each other?" She blinked, considering. 5 years since I started working for Richard." "In those 5 years, have I ever been anything but respectful to you?" "No," she admitted. "You've always been kind." "And Richard? Has he always been respectful to you?" A faint flush crept up her neck. We both knew the answer to that. Richard's temper was legendary among his staff, though he carefully concealed it from clients and the board. "What I'm about to do in there," I continued quietly, "has nothing to do with you. You won't be blamed for my presence. In fact," I reached into my purse and removed a sealed envelope. "I believe this will clarify the situation." Meredith accepted the envelope, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal curiosity. She opened it carefully, removing the document inside, a copy of the court order Catherine had obtained first thing this morning, freezing all Montgomery assets pending an emergency hearing. Her eyes widened as she scanned it. "This is a legally binding court order," I finished for her. "Effective as of 9 a.m. today." She looked up at me, and for the first time I saw something like respect in her expression. Not for Mrs. Montgomery, dutiful corporate wife, but for the woman standing before her now. "The board should see this," she said, handing it back. "Yes, they should." Meredith straightened her shoulders. "I'll announce you." She walked to the conference room doors and opened them without knocking, a small but significant departure from protocol. The low murmur of voices inside ceased abruptly. "Ms. Eleanor Bennett," Meredith announced clearly, then stepped aside. I walked past her into the room, where 12 men and 2 women sat around a massive table. Richard stood at the head, mid-presentation, a slide showing projected quarterly. Earnings frozen on the screen behind him. His expression when he saw me was priceless. Shock, followed quickly by cold fury. "Eleanor," he said, voice tight with control. "This is a private board meeting. You'll have to leave." I smiled pleasantly. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Richard. Not before sharing some pertinent information with the board." I turned to address the assembled directors, recognizing most of them from various corporate functions over the years. "Good morning. I apologize for the interruption, but I've just come from court with some time-sensitive information that affects Montgomery Industries." Richard moved toward me, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I ignored him, placing copies of the court order on the table. "As of 9 a.m. this morning, all Montgomery assets have been frozen pending an emergency hearing. This includes corporate accounts where Richard Montgomery has signatory authority." The board chairman, Edwin Harris, picked up the document, adjusting his glasses as he read. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard snatched the paper from Edwin's hand. "This is a personal matter that has no bearing on company operations. Eleanor is going through some emotional difficulties." I met Edwin's gaze directly. "What my husband means is that I've discovered evidence of financial impropriety that necessitated immediate legal action. Specifically, the diversion of marital assets to offshore accounts in shell corporations." A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. Edwin looked from me to Richard, his expression grave. "Richard, is there any truth to this?" "Of course not," Richard snapped. This is a domestic dispute being inappropriately dragged into a corporate setting. Eleanor should leave immediately, and we can continue our meeting. Actually, I countered, maintaining my calm, there's more the board should know. I removed a flash drive from my purse and placed it on the table. This contains documentation of transactions between Montgomery Industries and an entity called Winterland Enterprises over the past 6 months. Transactions that were never disclosed to the board or shareholders. Richard's face paled slightly. Several board members leaned forward, suddenly alert. Edwin picked up the flash drive. What is the nature of these transactions? Consulting fees, I said. Substantial ones, paid to a company incorporated 3 months ago with a single employee, Chloe Winters, who also happens to be romantically involved with Richard. The silence in the room was deafening. Richard's hands clenched into fists at his sides. David was in the kitchen when I emerged, brewing coffee and scrambling eggs. Morning, he said with a gentle smile. Figured you could use some breakfast before your meeting. Thank you. I accepted the mug he offered, grateful for the normalcy of the moment. For everything, really. I know this is awkward, especially since Richard's been using me as his patsy? David shook his head. Eleanor, Sarah, and I have watched for years as that man systematically isolated you from everyone who cares about you. We're just glad you're finally seeing him for what he is. I nodded, fighting back unexpected tears. How many other truths had I been blind to, while friends watched helplessly from the sidelines? David served the eggs, then leaned against the counter. Listen, about your business, I want you to know that Bennett Designs is secure. We've always kept the company in your name only, and all the contracts and accounts are separate from your personal finances. This was true, and a relief to remember. When I'd started my interior design business 10 years ago, Richard had insisted I use my maiden name to avoid any appearance of trading on the Montgomery name. I'd been hurt at the time, but now recognized it as an unexpected blessing. You should probably change your passwords, though, David added. For the business accounts, email, everything. Already done, I assured him. Last night after Sarah went to bed. David nodded approvingly. I've been running the numbers. Even if the worst happens with the divorce, Bennett Designs is thriving. You'll be okay, Eleanor. For the first time since sitting down at that restaurant table, I allowed myself to really believe that. I would be okay. Different. Changed. But okay. Sarah appeared, already dressed for her day at the hospital where she worked as a pediatric surgeon. Ready for battle? She asked, pouring herself coffee. As ready as I'll ever be. David glanced at his watch. I should get going if I'm dropping you at Catherine's office. Traffic's going to be brutal. Actually, I said, I need to make a stop first. 20 minutes later, David pulled up in front of First Republic Bank. Are you sure about this? He asked, eyeing the building dubiously. Absolutely certain. I gathered my purse. I'll only be a few minutes. Inside, I approached the manager's desk with confidence I didn't entirely feel. Good morning. I need to access my safe deposit box. The manager, a woman named Patricia, whom I'd dealt with for years, looked up with recognition. Mrs. Montgomery, of course. I'll need to see your ID and key. I handed over my driver's license, still in my married name, and the key I'd kept in a hidden compartment in my wallet, separate from my key ring where Richard might notice it. Patricia's eyes flickered briefly at my last name on the ID, but she made no comment. This way, please. The safe deposit box had been my one secret from Richard. I'd opened it 5 years ago, after discovering lipstick on Richard's collar for the first time. He'd explained it away, an overenthusiastic client who'd hugged him, inappropriately, and I'd chosen to believe him. But something had shifted in me that day. Some foundational trust cracked irreparably. I hadn't confronted him or left him. Instead, I'd opened this account in my name only and begun preparing, quietly and methodically, for a day I hoped would never come. In the private viewing room, I opened the box and removed its contents. A USB drive containing copies of our financial records going back 10 years. Original copies of my birth certificate and passport. The deed to a small apartment in my name that I'd purchased with inheritance money. And $50,000 in cash, accumulated slowly over 5 years from design fees I'd kept off the books. Preparing? Always preparing, while telling myself I was being paranoid. I tucked everything into my purse, then added the box key itself. I wouldn't be needing it anymore. Everything that mattered was coming with me. Back in the car, David raised an eyebrow but asked no questions. That was what I'd always appreciated about him as a business partner. He respected boundaries, Catherine's. "Office?" he asked simply. "Yes. And David, thank you." He waved away my gratitude. "Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "When you take that bastard to the cleaners, make sure I have front row seats." I smiled, a genuine smile that felt foreign on my face after the shock of the past 12 hours. Deal. Catherine Liang's office occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown building, with views of the city stretching in every direction. Her reputation as the best divorce attorney in the state was reflected in every detail of the space, from the original artwork to the subtle scent of jasmine that permeated the air. Power, confidence, and impeccable taste. Her assistant, a young man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, greeted me warmly. "Ms. Bennett, Ms. Liang is expecting you. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be lovely, thank you." He disappeared and returned moments later with a glass of water garnished with cucumber and mint. "Ms. Liang will be with you shortly." I sat in the reception area, noting how the furniture I'd selected for Catherine's lake house complemented the aesthetic of her office. Clean lines, comfortable but not too relaxed, supportive without being rigid. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Eleanor. Catherine appeared in the doorway of her office, immaculate in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. At 55, she projected an aura of absolute authority. Her silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a sleek chignon, her dark eyes missing nothing. She extended her hand, her grip firm. "Come in. We have work to do." Her office was a contrast to the reception area, still elegant but more personal, with photographs of her grown children and what appeared to be her grandchildren displayed prominently. A reminder that she understood what was at stake when families fractured. "I reviewed the documents you sent last night," she said once we were seated. "The prenuptial agreement, the emails, the photographs you took of the divorce papers, and doctored evidence." She leaned forward. "First, let me say that I'm sorry you're going through this. No one deserves such calculated betrayal." I nodded, acknowledging her empathy but not wanting to dwell on it. "What's our next step?" Catherine smiled slightly, approval in her eyes. "The most important thing right now is to secure your financial position before Richard can move assets. Based on the documents you found, he's been planning this for months, which means he's likely already begun hiding money." "He has offshore accounts," I said. "I saw the documentation." "Yes, and we'll get forensic accountants on those immediately. But first, we need to secure your immediate access to funds." She slid a document across the desk. "This is a petition for temporary spousal support and exclusive use of the marital residence during divorce proceedings. We'll file it today." I scanned the document, noting the substantial monthly support amount Catherine had specified. "Will a judge grant this? With your prenup and 20 years of marriage?" "Absolutely. Especially when we present evidence that Richard has been misrepresenting your financial situation and attempting to manipulate evidence." She passed me another document. "This is a temporary restraining order preventing Richard from disposing of marital assets or changing insurance beneficiaries. We'll file this simultaneously." I signed where indicated, each signature feeling like a step toward reclaiming my life. "Now," Catherine continued, "about the infidelity clause. The dinner, Last night is helpful, but not definitive proof. We need more substantial evidence of Richard's relationship with this woman. Chloe Winters, I supplied, head of marketing at Meridian Financial. Catherine made a note. I'll have my investigator start there. In the meantime, do you have access to Richard's electronic devices, email, phone records? I shook my head. Richard is extremely careful about his devices. Always has been. What about his schedule? Calendar? We share a digital calendar for social events, but he keeps his work calendar separate. Catherine considered this. Does he have an executive assistant at Montgomery Financial? Yes, Meredith. Parker. She's been with him for about 5 years. Is there any chance she might be sympathetic to your situation? I thought about Meredith. Efficient, professional, and the recipient of Richard's occasional explosive temper when things didn't go exactly as planned. She'd once called me, voice shaking, after Richard had berated her in front of the entire office for a scheduling error that turned out to be his own mistake. Possibly, I said slowly. Richard can be difficult as a boss, Catherine smiled. Perfect. I've found that executive assistants often know far more than their bosses realize, and they rarely appreciate being treated poorly. She made another note, then looked up. What about the Montgomery family? Richard's parents? Siblings? Where do they stand? The question caught me off guard. I hadn't even considered the wider family ramifications. Richard's father passed away 10 years ago. His mother, Victoria, lives in Boston. We see her at holidays, but we're not particularly close. Richard has one sister, Charlotte, who lives in London. They speak occasionally, but aren't close either. And your family? My parents are both gone. I have a brother, James, in Seattle with his wife and children. We're close, but distance makes it difficult to see each other often. Catherine nodded, processing this information. The reason I ask is that divorce can quickly become a family affair, especially in high-net-worth cases like yours. People choose sides. Montgomery Financial is a family business, technically, even if Richard has expanded it significantly. His hand closed around my arm, not painfully but firmly enough to stop me. Eleanor, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. I looked pointedly at his hand until he released me. Difficult for whom, Richard? You? Your mistress? Or the divorce lawyer you've already retained? His eyes narrowed. The mask slipped, just for a moment, revealing genuine surprise. What are you talking about? Please. I adjusted my bag. At least respect me enough not to lie about what we both know is happening. Something calculating entered his expression. If you've been going through my private papers, Eleanor, that's a serious breach of trust. I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. A breach of trust, that's rich, coming from you. Richard straightened, his banker's instincts taking over damage control, asset protection. Whatever you think you've found, I can explain, but not if you're going to be emotional about it. I'm far from emotional, Richard. In fact, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. I opened the door. I'll be in touch when I'm ready to discuss terms. Terms? His voice had an edge. Now. Eleanor, don't do anything rash. Remember, we have agreements in place. I paused, turning back to look at him one last time. The man who'd once been my future, now firmly my past. Yes, we do, including an infidelity clause that works both ways. I smiled, watching comprehension dawn in his eyes. Sleep well, Richard. I suspect tomorrow will be a very busy day for both of us. As the elevator doors closed on his thunderstruck expression, I felt 20 years of accumulated tension begin to unravel. The night air was cool against my face as I exited our building, nodding to Thomas one last time before stepping into the waiting Uber. Where to, ma'am? The driver asked. I gave him David's address. Not because I needed a man's protection or advice, but because his wife, Sarah, had been my closest friend for 15 years. The friend Richard had tried to separate me from, claiming she was a negative influence when she'd begun questioning his controlling behavior. As the car pulled away from the curb, my phone lit up with Richard's name yet again. This time, I didn't ignore it. Instead, I answered, saying nothing. Eleanor. His voice was tight, controlled. Whatever you're planning, think carefully. You're upset. I understand that. But rash decisions now could have permanent consequences. I waited. Eleanor? Are you there? I'm here, Richard. Just waiting to see if at any point in this conversation you plan to apologize. A pause. Of course I'm sorry you were upset tonight. Goodbye, Richard. Wait, Eleanor, don't... I ended the call, then turned off my phone entirely. Through the car window, I watched the city lights blur past, each one a pinpoint in the darkness. 20 years I'd spent as Eleanor Montgomery, organizing my existence around Richard's needs and ambitions. Tomorrow, I would begin again as simply Eleanor. And Richard would learn exactly what that meant. Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to outrage as I recounted the events of the evening. We sat in her cozy living room, mugs of tea gone cold between us. David had tactfully retreated to his home office after ensuring I was settled, understanding that this conversation needed to be between women who had weathered 2 decades of friendship. He brought her to your anniversary dinner? Sarah's voice rose in disbelief. The absolute audacity of that man. It gets worse. I pulled out my phone, showing her the photos I'd taken of the divorce papers and doctored evidence. He's been planning this for months. Sarah scrolled through the images, her face hardening with each swipe. When she reached the manipulated photo of me entering their building, she gasped. That snake! That was the night you brought us dinner after my diagnosis. You were carrying grocery bags. Exactly. And he's cropped them out to make it look like a clandestine meeting. Sarah set the phone down carefully, as if it might contaminate her. Eleanor, this is beyond calculating. This is sociopathic. 20 years, Sarah. 20 years I've been married to a man who could do this. I wrapped my hands around my mug, seeking warmth that wasn't there. How did I not see it? Because he didn't want you to see it, Sarah said firmly. Richard built his career on making people see exactly what he wanted them to see. Remember when he convinced the Wellington Group to invest right before that market crash? He'd been planning their bankruptcy for months. I did remember. Richard had come home exultant that night, explaining how he'd saved Montgomery Financial by offloading toxic assets onto the Wellington Group just before they became worthless. I'd felt a flicker of unease then, but had pushed it aside. Just business, Richard had insisted when I questioned the ethics. Just smart strategy. What are you going to do? Sarah asked, pulling me back to the present. I took a deep breath. I need to move quickly. Once Richard realizes I've seen those documents, he'll accelerate his timeline. He won't risk me finding evidence that could trigger the infidelity clause against him. You need a lawyer, Sarah said. Not just any lawyer, someone who can go toe-to-toe with whatever shark Richard has retained. I nodded. I've already reached out to Catherine Liang. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. The Catherine Liang? The one who took half of Curtis Reynolds' assets? After he tried to hide money during their divorce. The very same. How on earth did you get an appointment with her? She has a 6-month waiting list. I allowed myself a small smile. I redesigned her lake house last year. She said I saved her sanity after her own divorce, gave her a space that felt fully hers again. Eleanor Bennett, you magnificent woman. Sarah reached across the coffee table to squeeze my hand. Richard has no idea what's coming for him, does he? No, I said softly. He doesn't. My phone buzzed again. The 7th call from Richard since I'd left. This time, I silenced it permanently and set it aside. I should get some sleep. My meeting with Catherine is at 7 a.m. Sarah showed me to their guest room, which I'd decorated myself 3 years earlier when they'd renovated. The soft grays and blues had been chosen specifically for their calming properties. I needed that calm now. "David and I are here for you," Sarah said at the door. "Whatever you need." I hugged her tightly, grateful for the friends Richard had tried so hard to separate me from. "Thank you for everything." After Sarah left, I sat on the edge of the bed, reality finally catching up with me. My marriage was over. Had been over for months, apparently, though I was only learning this now. 20 years of shared history, dissolving like sugar in rain. I allowed myself exactly 10 minutes to cry, for the young woman who had believed in forever, for the middle-aged woman who'd been too afraid to see the truth, for the future I'd planned that would never come to pass. Then I dried my tears, washed my face, and opened my laptop. The prenuptial agreement was saved in my secure cloud storage. Richard had never imagined I'd keep my own copy, assuming the original was safely locked away with his lawyer. I read through it carefully, paying special attention to the infidelity clause we'd both insisted on. I'd wanted it because my parents' marriage had ended due to my father's affairs. Richard had agreed readily, perhaps already planning how he might circumvent it if necessary. The clause was clear. Proven infidelity would entitle the wronged spouse to 75% of all marital assets, including those acquired during the marriage. It would supersede all other distribution agreements outlined in the document, but proving infidelity required evidence, and Richard clearly believed his relationship with Chloe was sufficiently discreet. Or perhaps he planned to claim it had only just begun after he'd discovered my alleged affair with David. My thoughts were interrupted by another notification, not a call this time, but an email from our joint account. I hesitated before opening it, mentally preparing for whatever manipulation Richard might attempt. The email was brief, almost clinical. "Eleanor, your behavior tonight was both embarrassing and childish. I understand you may have misinterpreted my professional relationship with Chloe, but that does not excuse making a scene in public or disappearing afterward. I expect you to return home tomorrow so we can discuss this rationally. In the meantime, I've instructed security not to allow anyone into the building who might assist you in removing items from our home. This is for your own protection, as you're clearly not thinking clearly." Richard, I read it twice, noting the careful framing. Professional relationship. Misinterpreted. Making a scene. Language designed to make me doubt myself, to position me as unstable and him as the reasonable party. And the reference to building security, a reminder that he controlled our home, our possessions, even my access to my own clothing. I forwarded the email to Catherine with a brief note. Example of gaslighting and financial control. Then closed. My laptop. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and I needed to be rested for what lay ahead. Sleep, when it finally came, was deep and dreamless. For the first time in years, I didn't wake in the middle of the night, wondering if Richard would come home or if he was working late again. I woke at 5:30 a.m. feeling clear-headed and resolved. Sarah had left fresh towels and toiletries in the guest bathroom. I showered quickly, then dressed in clothes she'd lent me. A simple black sheath dress and cardigan, professional but understated. My anniversary dress from the night before was folded neatly on a chair, a remnant of a life I was already leaving behind. The maître d' looked uncertain, but took the card. "Of course, Mrs. Montgomery. That's very generous. One last thing." I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "The gentleman at my table, my husband, might try to order the 1982 Chateau Lafite. Rothschild, it's his favorite for special occasions. Please inform him it's been reserved for another guest this evening." The small act of petty revenge brought a genuine smile to my face. That particular vintage was Richard's weakness, one he indulged only for major celebrations or important clients. At $4,500 a bottle, it was liquid status, something he could casually order to demonstrate his wealth and taste. Not tonight. Outside, the April evening had turned cool. I declined the valet's offer to call a car, choosing instead to walk. The restaurant was only 15 blocks from our penthouse apartment, and I needed time to think. 20 years of marriage. 2 decades of building a life with Richard, of hosting dinner parties for his clients, of redecorating our homes to his exacting specifications, of fitting myself into the role of the perfect executive wife. What did I have to show for it? No. Children. Richard had always been too focused on his career, consistently postponing the family discussions until it was too late. My own career, while successful, had been carefully contained to never overshadow his. The elegant penthouse where everything was selected to impress his associates rather than bring me joy. And now, the final insult. Not just an affair. I'd suspected those before, but the audacity to bring his mistress to our anniversary dinner. The sheer arrogance of it sliced through me anew. My phone buzzed in my purse. Richard, no doubt, calling to berate me for making a scene or try to spin some elaborate explanation. I ignored it. Another buzz, then another. Text messages now. I kept walking, my heels clicking against the pavement in a steady rhythm that matched my heartbeat. With each step, my initial shock hardened into something else. Something colder, more calculating. Richard had built his career on leveraging information, on knowing precisely when to strike and when to retreat. He'd taught me, inadvertently over the years, how power worked, how the appearance of control could be as effective as control itself. By the time I reached our building, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The doorman nodded respectfully as I entered. "Good evening, Mrs. Montgomery. Mr. Montgomery isn't with you tonight?" "No, Thomas. He's working late." The lie came easily. "Could you please inform security that I'm not to be disturbed for the rest of the evening? No visitors, no calls from the front desk." "Of course, Mrs. Montgomery." The elevator whisked me to the penthouse, its silent efficiency matching my mood. Inside our apartment, all gleaming surfaces and carefully curated artwork, I kicked off my heels and headed straight for Richard's study. For 20 years, I'd respected the sanctity of this room, his private domain, where he conducted business calls and reviewed confidential documents, where he'd installed a sophisticated digital lock that required both a keycard and a numeric code, ostensibly to protect sensitive client information. Wondered now what else he might have been protecting. From my purse, I removed the spare keycard I'd had made years ago, not out of suspicion, but practicality. What if Richard were traveling and I needed something from his study? He'd agreed then, distracted by some work crisis, and had presumably forgotten about it since. The code was simple: our wedding date. Richard used the same 6 digits for everything private, assuming the sentimentality of it would prevent him from forgetting. I tapped in the numbers, watching the light turn green with a soft beep. Inside, the study was immaculate, as always. Leather-bound books lined custom shelves. A Mont Blanc pen set adorned the massive mahogany desk. The latest Bloomberg terminal glowed softly in the corner. I went straight to his desk, opening drawers systematically. The first contained standard office supplies. The second, file folders labeled by client. The third was locked. This was new. Sat in Richard's custom leather chair, considering. A locked drawer suggested secrets. But what kind? Financial records he didn't want me to see? Evidence of other affairs? Perhaps the key to understanding exactly how long he'd been planning to replace me with a younger model. My phone buzzed again. Richard, still calling. I silenced it without looking and continued my search. The key had to be somewhere accessible but not obvious. I ran my fingers along the underside of the desk. Nothing. Checked the potted plant in the corner. Nothing. Then I noticed the small decorative box on the bookshelf, the one that had once belonged to Richard's grandfather. Inside, nestled among cufflinks and collar stays, a small silver key. It fit the drawer perfectly. Inside were several folders, each neatly labeled. The first contained documentation for offshore accounts I'd never known about. The second held what appeared to be investment records for properties purchased under an LLC named Winterland Enterprises. Winter, like Chloe Winters. The third folder made my blood run cold. Divorce papers, already drawn up but not yet filed. Dated 3 months earlier. The terms were spelled out in meticulous detail. I would receive a generous settlement of $2 million, a fraction of our actual worth, and vacate the penthouse within 30 days. In exchange, I would make no claims on Richard's business holdings, investment accounts, or the vacation properties in Aspen and the Hamptons. Attached was a letter from our prenuptial agreement, highlighting the infidelity clause. If either party committed adultery, the other could claim 75% of jointly held assets. Richard had signed the prenup reluctantly, only after my father insisted. At the time, I'd been the one with family money, not him. Clearly, he was planning to accuse me of infidelity to trigger the clause. But where was his evidence? The final folder contained photographs. Me having lunch with various male clients over the past 6 months. Me hugging my business partner David after we landed, the Hathaway Hotel renovation. Each image carefully curated to suggest impropriety where none existed. The last photo made me gasp. It showed me entering David's apartment building late one evening, appearing furtive. I remembered that night clearly. David's wife had just been diagnosed with breast cancer, and I'd brought over a casserole and some groceries. The photo was cropped to exclude the bags I'd been carrying. Manufactured evidence for a manufactured affair. So that was Richard's plan. Accuse me of cheating. Present his doctored evidence, and discard me with a fraction of what I was entitled to. Then, presumably, install Chloe in my place once enough time had passed to make it seem respectable. I carefully photographed every document with my phone, then returned everything exactly as I'd found it. My hands were steady, my breathing controlled. The initial shock had crystallized into something harder, more focused. Back in our bedroom, I packed a small overnight bag. Just essentials, I could send for the rest later. As I selected items, my eye caught the framed photo on my bedside table. Richard and me on our 10th anniversary, aboard a yacht in the Mediterranean. His arm around my waist, both of us smiling, into the camera. I'd thought we were happy then. Perhaps we were. But happiness, I was learning, was no match for ambition. And Richard's ambition had always been limitless. I changed out of my anniversary dress into jeans and a sweater, clothes Richard always complained made me look common. I transferred essential documents from my personal safe to my bag. Passport, birth certificate, the deed to my parents' lake house that Richard didn't know I'd inherited. Just as I was zipping the bag, I heard the front door open. Richard's familiar footsteps in the hallway, his keys dropping into the ceramic bowl by the entrance, a sound I'd heard thousands of times before. Eleanor? His voice was controlled, reasonable. The voice he used when he wanted to make me feel irrational. Eleanor. We need to talk. I stepped into the hallway, bag in hand. Richard stood by the entrance, his perfect suit slightly rumpled now, his expression a careful mask of concern. You're packing. It wasn't a question. Don't you think that's an overreaction? I studied him. This man I'd spent half my life with, searching for any flicker of the person I'd fallen in love with. Instead, I saw only calculation behind his eyes. A risk assessment in progress. Chloe left quite upset. He continued when I didn't respond. I had to spend the entire dinner explaining. Your episode. Episode. I repeated the word softly. Is that what we're calling it when a wife discovers her husband's mistress? Richard sighed, loosening his tie. It's not what you think. It never is. Eleanor, be reasonable. Chloe is a valuable business connection. Yes, perhaps we've become close, but stop. My voice was quiet but firm. I'm not interested in your explanations. Not tonight. He registered the bag in my hand, his expression darkening. Where do you think you're going? Out. Don't be ridiculous. It's nearly midnight. Is that concern I hear, Richard? How touching. I moved toward the door, but he shifted to block my path. We need to talk about this like adults, he insisted. Running away solves nothing. I'm not running away. I'm giving myself space to think. Something I should have done years ago. His jaw tightened. If you leave now, Eleanor, I can't guarantee what happens next. It was meant to sound like concern, but I recognized the threat beneath. Richard Montgomery didn't lose control of his business, his image, or his wife. That's the difference between us, Richard. I stepped around him, reaching for the door. I'm no longer interested in your guarantees. The reservation had been made weeks in advance. Le Pavilion, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, where waitlists stretched for months and critics raved about the 7-course tasting menu. I'd selected my outfit with equal care, a midnight, blue dress that caught the light when I moved, diamond drop earrings that had been my grandmother's, and the delicate platinum anniversary band Richard had given me 5 years earlier. 20 years of marriage deserved celebration, even if lately, those years had felt increasingly hollow. I arrived exactly on time, 7:30 p.m. on a perfect spring evening. The maître d' greeted me with practiced deference. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Mrs. Montgomery. How lovely to see you again. Mr. Montgomery has already arrived. Of course he had. Richard was pathologically punctual, a quality I once found endearing but now recognized as another form of control. A way to ensure he always had the upper hand, setting the stage before anyone else arrived. He requested the private alcove in the back. A special occasion deserves privacy, he said. I forced a smile, following the maître d' through the dimly lit restaurant. Crystal stemware glinted in the candlelight. Hushed conversations and the occasional tinkling laugh floated around us. I straightened my shoulders, preparing for the performance ahead. Another anniversary dinner with increasingly less to celebrate. Another evening of pretending we were still the power couple we presented. To the world, I saw Richard before he saw me. My husband of 20 years, immaculately dressed in the Tom Ford suit I'd gifted him last Christmas. His silver hair perfectly coiffed, his posture commanding even while seated. The quintessential successful investment banker, polished, powerful, and utterly ruthless when necessary. But he wasn't alone. Across from him sat a woman I'd never seen before. Young, mid-30s at most. Sleek blonde hair and a chin-length bob. A red dress that hugged every curve. She was laughing at something Richard had said, her hand resting casually on his wrist in a gesture of intimacy that made my blood run cold. I stopped walking. The maître d' continued a few more steps before realizing I wasn't following. By then, Richard had noticed us. His eyes met mine across the restaurant, and in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that this was no business dinner. The flash of irritation in his expression, quickly masked by a practiced smile, told me everything. 20 years of marriage, and my husband had brought his mistress to our anniversary dinner. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Something inside me, something that had been bending for years, finally snapped. But not in the way Richard might have expected. Not in tears or raised voices or a dramatic exit that would make the other diners whisper behind their hands. Instead, I felt a strange, icy calm settle over me. A clarity I hadn't experienced in years. Mrs. Montgomery? Is everything all right? The maître d' was looking at me with concern. I smiled. Everything is perfect. Please, lead the way. As we approached the table, Richard stood, smoothing his tie in a nervous gesture I recognized from countless business dinners when he was about to close a difficult deal. "Eleanor, darling, you look lovely." The woman turned, surprise briefly, flickering across her perfectly made-up face before she too adopted a poised smile. Up close, she was even younger than I'd first thought, perhaps not even 30. Beautiful in that polished, slightly manufactured way that required expensive skincare routines and regular visits to exclusive salons. "Eleanor," Richard continued, "this is Chloe Winters. She's the new head of marketing at Meridian Financial. I mentioned her to you, I believe." He had not. "Chloe, my wife, Eleanor." Chloe extended a manicured hand. "It's so nice to finally meet you, Mrs. Montgomery." "Richard speaks of you often." I doubted that very much. "Please call me Eleanor." I took her hand, noting the firmness of her grip. "And how lovely that Richard invited you to join us for our 20th anniversary celebration." I watched their reactions carefully. Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Chloe's eyes widened just a fraction, darting to Richard before returning to me. "Anniversary?" She managed to keep her voice steady, but a faint blush crept up her neck. "I had no idea. Richard just said he wanted to introduce us over dinner." "Did he now?" I slid into the seat beside Richard rather than across from him, forcing Chloe to pivot to maintain eye contact. 20 years today, quite the milestone." Richard cleared his throat. "Eleanor, the champagne you ordered, sir." The sommelier appeared, presenting an ice-chilled bottle of Dom Pérignon. "Shall I pour?" "Yes, please." Richard's voice was tight. 3 glasses." I studied my husband as the champagne was poured. The man I'd met at 24 when I was fresh out of business school, and he was a rising star at Montgomery Financial, his father's firm. The man who'd pursued me relentlessly, dazzled me with his confidence and promised me the world. The man who, somewhere along the way, had become a stranger wearing my husband's face. How long had he been seeing Chloe? Weeks? Months? Or was she just the latest in a series I'd been too blind or too willing to ignore? The sommelier finished, pouring and discreetly withdrew. Richard raised his glass, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "To new connections," he offered, his gaze flickering between Chloe and me. I raised my glass, but didn't drink. "Actually, I'd like to propose a different toast." I turned to Chloe, holding her gaze. "To honesty. Something I've discovered is surprisingly rare, even after 20 years. Chloe's discomfort was palpable now. She took a sip of champagne, probably to avoid responding. "Eleanor," Richard's voice had that warning tone he used when I was embarrassing him at company functions. "Perhaps we should order. The chef has prepared something special, I'm told." "I'm sure he has." I set down my untouched champagne. "But before we do, I'm curious. Chloe, how long have you been working with my husband?" She glanced at Richard before answering. "About 6 months. I was brought in to revamp Meridian's digital strategy." 6 months. Around the time Richard had started working later, traveling more frequently, becoming increasingly critical of everything from my appearance to the way I loaded the dishwasher. "And how long have you been sleeping with him?" The question hung in the air like shattered glass. Chloe's carefully composed expression crumbled. Richard's hand clamped around my wrist beneath the table, his fingers digging painfully into my skin. "Eleanor." His voice was a controlled hiss. "You're embarrassing yourself." I looked down at his hand, then back up at his face. "No, Richard." For the first time in years, I'm seeing things clearly. I turned back to Chloe, who was now staring fixedly at her plate. "I apologize for being so direct, Chloe, but I assume a woman in your position, head of marketing for a major financial institution, values directness, efficiency, no time wasted on pretense." She looked up, something shifting in her expression. Not just embarrassment now, but a dawning wariness. "Mrs. Montgomery, Eleanor, I think there's been a misunderstanding." Has there? I reached for my champagne, took a deliberate sip. Let me clarify then. My husband invited you, a woman he's clearly intimately involved with, to the restaurant where he proposed to me, on the evening of our 20th wedding anniversary. I set down my glass precisely. What exactly am I misunderstanding? Richard's grip on my wrist tightened further. That's enough. He turned to Chloe, his voice softening. I'm sorry about this. Eleanor has been under a lot of stress lately. Perhaps it would be better if we reschedule. I laughed, the sound startling both of them. By all means, don't let me interrupt your evening. In fact, I extracted my wrist from Richard's grasp and reached for my purse. I'll leave you two to enjoy the chef's special preparation. I stood, smoothing my dress. Chloe looked mortified, Richard furious. But there was something else in his expression too. Relief. He thought I was making this easy for him, slinking away in humiliation while he comforted his young mistress. He thought this was the end of the conversation. He was very, very wrong. Before I go, I said, my voice carrying just enough to make the nearby tables glance over, I should mention one thing. I turned to Chloe. Richard doesn't particularly like commitment. 20 years, and he still forgets anniversaries. So I wouldn't count on that corner office he promised you. Her eyes widened. I never, and Richard, I continued, don't wait up. I think perhaps I need some time to consider what our vows really meant to you. I walked away, feeling their stares burning into my back. The maître d' materialized as I approached the exit, concern evident in his expression. Mrs. Montgomery? Is everything all right? Was there a problem with the service? I smiled, reaching into my purse. I pulled out my platinum credit card, the one linked to our joint account, the one I rarely used for precisely this reason. Richard scrutinized every transaction, questioning every purchase as if I were a teenager with an allowance rather than a successful interior designer with my own income. No problem at all. In fact, I'd like to pay for their dinner in advance. The full tasting menu, wine pairings, the works. I handed him the card. Please add a 30% gratuity for the staff. My husband sometimes forgets that part.